Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about Norsca. This is a topic that we had around a year ago, which funny enough ended up becoming the whole Champions of Chaos style DLC, but it's something that could extremely benefit Norsca and the Warriors of Chaos too in a certain sense, because the format could be expanded upon a little bit, which would then allow for a few extra mechanics here and there. Now let me just start off by saying that Norsca as a faction is not great. It's one of those factions which started off really well in the Warhammer 1 map, but was not playable for a while in Warhammer 2, and yeah, it's not been great ever since. Which is honestly really bizarre considering that it was the pre-order incentive for Warhammer 2, yet plays like a Warhammer 1 faction, which is, yeah, not great. Norsca did receive a minor fix when it came to the Immortal Empire's release, but even then Creative Assembly stated that this isn't a rework, it's just a small update. And yeah, I mean, it kind of did fix a bunch of issues. Norsca can now start colonizing the rest of the world, which is something that you would expect from a human faction anyway. But given its quite limited roster, the fact that both its legendary lords are in the exact same country, and really Norsca not having an army book prior, it did make the race extremely limited to play. You don't really have too much incentive to actually replay the faction. Yes, you do have a monster-focused faction with Frog, but yeah, let's be honest, no. Norsca is a small country, it's extremely limited in where they can expand to, and lore-wise, while cool and unique, they're still not really that interesting. I still stand by the fact that Norsca should not have been the pre-order incentive for Total War Warhammer 2, and it should have been the Dogs of War instead, considering that the Dogs of War at least had an army book, whereas Norsca didn't. If you wanted to play a Norsca army on the tabletop, yeah, you just built an army of marauders and marauder horsemen. Viable, but not fun. But here we are, and we're kind of stuck with this situation. Though, Creative Assembly can do a few things to fix things up and just make the faction not only quite more fun, but give a lot of variety and a lot of different playstyles in the form of a DLC. The Champions of Chaos DLC format, which really has no official name, but let's just call it a culture pack just for the sake of having a name, is a format that we know Creative Assembly are potentially thinking about using again. Stuff like this would be expected for factions like the Greenskins, the Vampire Counts, and even the Empire, but it could also work very well for Norsca. Well, not so much Norsca because it would have to be renamed. Again, Northern tribes would be the perfect thing here, because let's look at the Warhammer Fantasy world via Immortal Empires. It's absolutely massive. There are loads of Norscan factions all over the place. And these aren't really Norscan factions. Yes, there are some, but the grand majority of them are supposed to be other tribes, other cultures, of which none are really represented in-game barring a name or two. And it's a bit of a shame. Yes, none of these other tribes do actually have army books, but then again, Norsca didn't. Norsca is actually more just Chaos Light with the Forge World update, and that's it. But with a little bit of creative freedom, as per their agreement with Games Workshop, obviously also taking into account their partnership going into other forms of Warhammer media, such as the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay series, something could be done in the very same way. Think about it this way, a lot of units. Yes, there would be a bunch of reskinned things because the basic units like Marauder Horsemen and Marauder Fighters would have the same functionality, they just have to be changed visually. And essentially, like the Champions of Chaos, you can get 4 races for the price of 1. Imagine a DLC which expands Norsca again into the Tribes of the North or Northern Tribes, where you can play as a Norscan tribe, which you can already do but we'll talk about that a little bit more further on in the video. But you'll also have the functionality and the ability to play as a Kurgan tribe, a Hung tribe, and a Tong tribe. These are the 4 main cultures which appear in Warhammer Fantasy lore as the Northmen, essentially. These are the main Chaos Warriors that you will see. Obviously, there's others, that get corrupted in Kislev and the Empire, possibly Grand Cathay too, but the main humans, which are the main threat to you, are the 4 listed above. This would give you a bunch of new legendary lords, likely around 4, because really did like the Champions of Chaos idea of 4 legendary lords with 4 new armies, adding to a lot more replayability. If anything, the Warriors of Chaos have kind of proven that. Champions of Chaos has given me so much replayability because now there's 5 unique playstyles. So it would be great to see that for Norsca and represent the Chaos cultures more, really. Prior to anything else, a free rework would also be attached to this, which, to be honest, the base stuff for Norsca isn't too bad. Monster hunts are pretty cool. The whole allegiance system is actually quite good too. The only difference is I'd say that the allegiance system needs to be updated, that the more you actually get closer to the Chaos God, the more you'll start to unlock the faction mechanics. So if you play as a Norscan, Hung, Tong or whatever, and you dedicate yourself to Khorne, well, then you'll start to get the bloodletting mechanic. Dedicate to Nurgle and you'll start to get plagues. Dedicate to Tzeentch, get the changing of the ways, and dedicate to Slaanesh and get seduction. With that, as you progress through the dedication line, it could be interesting to be able to recruit some Warriors of Chaos from that specific dedication. So if you become, say, a champion of Slaanesh, you'll get access to some Slaanesh Warriors of Chaos. If you become a champion of Nurgle, you get some Warriors of Chaos with the Nurgle mark. This would work in a very similar way as to how the Warriors of Chaos get demon units, but you're a minor tribe, you're not the big warriors, so the Chaos Gods wouldn't pay too much attention to you. However, you might have some warriors becoming dedicated, and this would represent that really well. I mean, we already have the lines there that just need to be expanded upon a little bit, and yeah, I think it would be kind of cool. Further to that, there should be a fifth way to actually dedicate yourself, which would be undivided. Now, you wouldn't be able to get the mechanics, but you would be able to get some fancy units. So, no bloodletting, but yes, some Chaos Warriors of Khorne. These would be limited, however, you'd have some other faction bonuses to kind of improve your faction as a whole, so I kind of like the idea of this. Plus, Undivided needs to be represented too. We have that with, technically, Daniel. We have that with Archeon the Everchosen, Kolek, and, well, you know, technically Sigvald, even though he falls more on the Slaanesh line. So having a northern tribe which falls under Undivided also works quite well. This is where we start seeing the difference. So we'll start off with Norsca, as Norsca is the main faction here. So, Norsca would just receive stuff that they desperately need. A new shaman type character for a lord choice, a melee hero character, and a few different unit variants. Essentially, if we go into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, we know of Norscans using bows, we know of Norscan whalers and stuff like that. These would be units that the rigs and animations already kind of exist, so you might as well take advantage of it just to flesh them out and give them a pretty unique feel. The bowmen themselves would have to be on foot though, as Norscans weren't known to have a lot of cavalry. That being said, a little bit more extra variance when it comes to the chariots would be kind of nice. Move Wulfric to say Skeggi and then have a different Norscan character inside of Norsca, and we've already got some variety. Obviously, Wulfric would need to have a little bit of a change too, giving him the pseudo-horde mechanic, which, again, I know I mention a lot, but goddammit, he is the Wanderer. He needs to be able to wander. The big question is what's going to happen to Frog. You see, Frog is supposed to be the king of the monsters, yet he plays as a Norsca faction. In the perfect world, he'd only be able to have access to monsters and maybe a few new monster variants. If Creative Assembly decide to go full ham on this, considering that Norsca as a faction itself, this would be, you know, Wulfric and another character, we don't really need too many new units, as they do already have a decently sized roster, then they could put all the main Norsca attention into a Troll Lord, a Troll Hero. You'd have some of the monsters that Norsca already has access to, and a few other variants of trolls and beasties that we can already find in-game, plus a new unit or two. We're expecting Bile Trolls, for example, with Tamokon, so it could be possible that we could see Tamokon's Bile Trolls also going to Frog. The only problem here is there'll be some units linked to other DLCs, which means that you'd only be able to get the full experience with Frog if you own the other DLCs, unless they've come up with a system which could allow for certain units to be used by other DLCs but not be unlocked with the other stuff, if you get what I mean. But now we start looking towards newer factions, the first being the Kurgan. First up, you could put a legendary lord in the known Kurgan lands, which would be around the areas where we know that Kolek is right now. So yeah, there's already Norscan factions around the area, so replace and go and just add in one playable faction there and two minor factions of Kurgans to give a little map variety, and there you go. So we've already got that. When it comes to units, you'd basically be copy-pasting the human units of the Norskans. These would be the Marauders, Marauder Chieftains, all that type of stuff, but they would be reskinned. The idea is obviously they have to start looking more like Mongols rather than they would standard Norskans. Obviously this faction would not have access to all the different monster units because the Kurgans are mobile, so they wouldn't be lugging around this slow giant or trolls because it just doesn't fit with them. Instead, what we would have is still the mammoths. The mammoths are actually known to also be Kurgan, but we'd have some new units which would be in the form of horsemasters and chariots and so on, a lot of bows because the Kurgans themselves are known for hit and run tactics. Again, very much like the Mongols of the real world. Give them some unique stuff like berserker women, because we know that women are actually quite well known throughout the Kurgan warbands. Pretty much everyone fights there, and just add in a few bits and bobs here and there to make them more aggressive. A lot of berserker type units, a lot of just fast movement. The Norskans themselves can do that, but it's kind of well rounded as you do have a lot of variety. Here you're just throwing people in to die because it's much more with the whole kill or be killed situation here, whereas the Norskans are far more open to trading. They're a bit more civilized. The Kurgans are not. They are bloodthirsty animals. Have a legendary lord which is focused around boosting up a cavalry-focused army, and yeah, you'll be pretty much ready to just do as much damage as possible. Reskin the shamans and the chieftains, and yeah, you've got lord choices and hero choices. There doesn't need to be a lot. There just needs to be a magical lord choice, melee lord choice, a magical hero choice, and a melee hero choice, and yeah, sorted. Now we're going to move on to the Hung. You see, if people fear the Kurgan, then they are absolutely terrified of the Hung. Most lore even states that the Hung are just much more dangerous. So this is another Northman tribe. We know a little bit more when it comes to factions because the Ungals, the Dreaded Woe, and the Hmong are all Hung tribes. With the Dreaded Woe starting inside Cafe, so it could be possible just to have a faction of Chaos Worshippers already in Cafe causing problems, and yeah, you could easily put like one minor faction in there too, and you've already got something there. The problem is, how do you make them unique compared to the other tribes? And well, I think there is one way to do so. You see, the Warriors of Chaos do have weapon variants that Norsca generally doesn't have. So this would be like the Hellscourgers, halberds and stuff. Well, why not give them all the weapon variants? Give them a bunch of horses too, because obviously it does make sense, but the idea would be just literally give them every single type of chaos weapon that you could imagine and make them the melee focused faction out of all, because the Kurgan would be considered more skirmishing based. Obviously Norsca would be more suited around monsters and just heavy combat. So if you've got a faction which is literally just charging in with all these different types of weapons instead, you've got 3 distinct playstyles. This would likely be one of the harder campaigns, as you'd already start within Grand Cafe and be in an absolute dangerous location, but again, this would allow you to challenge yourself. Everyone likes a challenge every now and then. It gives you 3 different ways to play a Chaos faction. Next, we move on to the Tong, and this is where things get a little bit left-fieldy. You see, the Tong are known to be heavily mutated. They're essentially known to be kind of like the Scaramore tribe in the north. The problem is there's not much that can actually be done with the Tong because, yeah, there's literally no other thing to make them quite unique. Unless Creative Assembly want to start bringing in, say, a lot of mutants and just go real full ham, but I imagine that stuff like that would make things way too expensive, which could then cause a little bit of a problem there. And you might be wondering, but you said 4 factions, 4 legendary lords, right now we only have 3. Well, what if they decided not to bring in the Tong and instead did something fairly unique? The Fimir are a faction which really don't get represented enough in Warhammer Fantasy. They've slowly been creeping back in at the end of 8th edition, but then, well, yeah, the world blew up. Now we have Fimir here, and we've started to see new Fimir lore thanks to the efforts of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So what about a Fimir faction? It still technically counts as a northern tribe, as the Fimir are a tribe-focused humanoid chaos faction. They're very associated with chaos, more so than most humans, I would say. So yeah, give them unit variants, give them a unique Fimir legendary lord, a Fimir lord choice, melee and also magic. Mix in with all the other monsters that you already have access to, like for example the skin wolves, the giants, all that type of stuff, because it does kind of fit with a Fimir faction too, and have a little fun with it. As for a starting location, well, the Fimir can be found anywhere where there's marshlands, so why not in Marienburg, one of the minor settlements in the Westerland, so you can already start causing problems to the Empire factions there, and it would give a little bit of help towards Festus, who would have a potential vassal there. We'll talk about how the Warriors of Chaos would benefit from this in a little second. But the idea is, have something completely new. Having in some variants here would just benefit everyone, and not only that, it would take the idea off that it's mostly a reskin DLC. That's the biggest issue that I see when it comes to the Champions of Chaos DLC, where everyone was just complaining, oh, it's a reskin, it's a reskin, it's a reskin. So if you have one faction, which isn't really reskinned, people would have less reason to complain. I mean, it's still the Total War fanbase, so they'll find a reason anyway, but it's better, definitely better. We already even know of a Fimir character that was introduced in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so you can already base it off that. This was suggested by multiple people in recent comments, and it kind of makes sense. The only problem is it would take a lot of the dev time, and it does mean that we wouldn't really get a lot of new units. Possibly just the Cursed Etin, considering that, I mean, it's cool, right? The Cursed Etin is one of the best looking giant models. It's a mutated Norscan, but nothing in the lore really states that a Kurgan or Hung couldn't turn into one of these mutants. You could easily have a few variants of them with each of the laws of magic that the Kurgans and the Norskans and stuff would normally have access to in a melee version too. Yes, I know I said no giants for the Kurgans, but kind of going back to it, mostly because it's an Etin, and something completely new would have to be done. It's also something that could be kind of realistic, considering that in the Champions of Chaos we only actually had one unique new unit. Everything else was basically just reskinned and reskinned. However here, well, yeah, it's kind of the same, but we'd be getting a bit more different faction style play, because a Warriors of Chaos faction will still play as a Warriors of Chaos faction, whereas here, a skirmishing focused Kurgan would be very different to a melee focused Hung, to a monster focused Norscan, and obviously if Fimir end up happening, to a, well, monster faction again, but in a different sense. Having a little bit of variety with these factions would also kind of benefit the Chaos Warrior player, mostly because at least it won't be Norskans all the time. It's a bit of an issue where the Norskans don't really do much, right? They barely do anything, they barely attack. I mean, they'll try, but it's the faction, it's the alliance system, the vassal system, better yet said. It's not really great. If anything, they only serve to be more of a visual thing, but the problem is that it's the same thing. You're just seeing Norscan tribes everywhere. Having a little bit of variety at least will make you feel like you're uniting the tribes, and having a little bit more roleplay aspect to it, right? You're a Chaos Lord, you've managed to unite a bunch of the factions, and now you're sending them off to war. Hopefully by the time that this happens, they kind of update the vassal feature to make it a little bit more worth it, which is kind of weird. This is the thing, right? There has been mechanics that are from, like, say, Free Kingdoms, that are very good and would be very useful here, but it's just not implemented as a similar system, but it just doesn't work as intended, I think. Don't get me wrong, it's better now than it used to be, but yeah, I feel like something like this would be cool for a roleplay aspect for the Warriors of Chaos. In general, it would be nice to have variety for the northern tribes, just to have a little bit more fun. I think something like this would work. It definitely would be useful to get a bit more fleshed out lore on the Hung and all that type of stuff, which I imagine a DLC like this could really lead to one of those fancy new ebooks we've been getting lately. How cool would that be? But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I'm rather curious to see what you guys think about this. Obviously, it's something that we talked about in the past, but I wanted to expand upon it a little bit more and just have a little bit of fun, because I've been thinking about Norsca. I've really been thinking about Norsca a lot. I've been thinking about really how it shouldn't have been a DLC, but if we're going to be stuck with it, they might as well make it as good as possible. But yeah, with all that being said, have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.